Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé. Let's see what happens.
En la fiesta por tu cumpleaños es una cosa. Con mis amigos por el almuerzo, tú hablas de cosas muy inapropiadas. Y I am embarrassed.
Yeah, it was awful. The things that he did to her, the way he treated her was awful. And if I were to put the things on a scale, I would say the things he did to her were worse in my book as an observer. You could say her transgressions are more fundamental to their relationship, right? Like this idea that he's an idiot, the messages that she would give to him, that he's a child, he doesn't understand how to use Excel, he's such an idiot, this kind of thing. You could say those are worse. They're both pretty bad.
Quiero un esposo que haga lo que tú quieras. Tú
Mi
quieres un
amor,
esposo.
casarse no es un prison.
No,
tú
no,
puedes
tú
hacer
no
que
entiendes.
tú quieres.
Tú no entiendes. Yo no siento que Daniel respete lo que yo quiero. Ella siempre quiere tener la razón y siempre quiere hacer la cosa.
Yeah. She has a really hard time admitting when she's wrong. And so does he to her. So, yeah. But I would take a guess and say that if she were better at it, he would rise to the occasion and reciprocate. It's just a guess. But yeah.
A su manera. ¿Qué tipo de relación tú quieres?
Con confianza primero.
And I'll say it again. It just pains me to watch couples trying to work it out. They're trying. They're trying to have this conversation like, okay, what do we want here? Just think about something that you're an expert on. You're in your job or parenting or a hobby, and think about times when you see other people, maybe in a conversation, or you just see and they're just completely screwing it up, not because they're trying to, because they just don't know what they don't know. And they are operating as if the information isn't out there, or they're operating as if they know what they're doing. And you're watching it, you're just like, no, don't do that. Oh, no, you're really going to screw yourself over with that. That's what it's like watching these people on these shows have these conversations. I'm like, no, this isn't going to help. I see the effort. I see the gears turning. Because they could be worse. They could be yelling at each other. They're trying. They're probably suppressing things that they really want to get the other person with. And the effort is there. The path is, there's potential. There's something to work with, and they're just aimless in how they talk about this, because of course they are, because people aren't trained in this. They don't get education around this. And the amount of misinformation on the internet, I'm sure everyone on the internet thinks of both of them as suffering from narcissistic personality disorder, and they're gaslighting each other. Literally, like, I'm not even joking. It's getting worse, the application of clinical terms like narcissism and gaslighting and OCD and other kinds of things. It was ridiculous 3 years ago. It is beyond ridiculous now. And 99% of the people doing it are well-meaning, good, smart people that are being misled by the internet. And I see clinicians doing it now on TikTok and other places. And because, it takes all kinds to be a therapist. You don't have to be a genius to be a therapist, to get a license or to get a degree. Also, you can have professors that don't know shit. I've had professors that didn't know shit. You think you're a professor, you should know shit. No, there are professors that don't know shit. Or they are, they have a class foisted on them that they didn't want to teach because no one else was around to teach it. I've had professors like that too. So it's a rough place. Now, it's easy for me to say, I was like, well, I know it all and everyone else is stupid, so, take that for what it's worth. But anyway, the point is that I just wish I were there. Just give me 10 minutes to give them a foundation. It was like, oh, okay, hey, how do you feel? And I'd start with the feelings, and I would put out some principles of both of you probably need to apologize to the other person, but you have to do it at the same time. You have to respond well to the other person. We need to build something here of voicing resentment or pain, fear, and hurt, and having the other person care, show that they care. If both of you do that, and it takes a lot of trust, but that trust is built when when you are vulnerable and the other person rises to the occasion, you're like, oh, okay, I trust that person a little bit more. It rights the wrongs of the past, and I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt. And there's a path forward. You can not only build the love you had, but it could be 10 times better than it ever was. Like, there's a path forward. And just watching them, because I think a part of me was kind of pulling for them. And it's heartbreaking to watch when people, they don't know what they don't know. And their life become, I think Danielle has been in a string of relationships along these lines. And it's there's so much suffering in the world, and some of it can be avoided, some of it can't. This can be avoided. This could be avoided. Now, people are sending me these announcements that 90 Day Fiancé is coming out with this new series called Couple Therapy or something, 90 Day Fiancé Therapy. And, on one hand, I'm like, yay. On the other hand, I'm like, oh, it's just going to make me more pissed off, because it'll be these one-off sessions that aren't what's needed, or the therapist will be a quack, because that happens, and I'll just be holding back because I don't want to ruin someone else's career but I can't not say some things. So on one hand I'm like, yeah, and the other hand I'm like, oh boy, this could be rough for everybody, including me and you.
Cuando yo dice una cosa, tú necesitas creer. Y final.
Y ya, aunque no me guste, así es como tú dices.
Cosas no te gusta, es tu problema.
Yeah, I mean, verbatim what she's saying is, I have all the power and control and you just have to deal with it. But I don't think that's what she means, or at least that's not baseline how she feels. I don't think that's what's going on. So I think she is inadvertently saying the exact phrases that confirm to him that this relationship is doomed.
This is who I am.
Que tú no puedes cambiar.
No, y no quiero.
Entonces yo...
Yeah, I don't think that's true. I think she is capable of change, but maybe she has a policy, because I think she's talked about how, so there's a possibility that, because she's talked about how she was the victim in the past. Now, some people who claim victimization were never victimized, but I think there's a good chance that maybe some things happened in her past relationships, and so the pendulum has swung, and she's now saying, to protect myself, I'm not going to give in. I'm not going to change. I did all the changing in the past. I did all the things. I did all the desperation. I did all the adjustment, and no one met me halfway, so I'm done doing that. I think that's where this comes from. And so I'm going to take a guess and say that she's in a lot of pain and a lot of hurt, a lot of anxiety, very distressed right now, and maybe she's saying this is done, because you would never say that in a relationship. Like, I'm not going to change, and I'm never going to change. I don't want to change. So now maybe what she's saying is, look, my personality is what it is. So you either like that part of my person, not anything bad about my personality, but, just generally how I operate. I don't want to adjust that. I think that's actually what she's saying because of her past relationships, or at least the way she sees her past relationships.
Sí puedo cambiar. Yo entonces no quiero cambiar. Tú no puedes cambiar tu forma, yo no quiero cambiar la mía. Y punto.
And this is why when you have a professional, they can help with this, because they're talking abstractly. It might feel like in the moment that they understand each other, but I don't think they understand each other. The words they're using aren't reflective of what they really mean. Now, maybe it is, but if I were there, I'd be, okay, Danielle, so when you say you don't want to change, let's drill down on that a little bit. Are you saying that, for example, let's say that you have a habit of dismissing Yohan? Not saying that you do, but let's just say that you did. Let's say that you had a habit of just discounting his feelings. Are you saying that you don't want to change that if that were actually true? My guess is she would say no. I mean, if I did something like that, which I don't, which she does, but she said, I don't. But if I did, then yeah, obviously I would want to change. What I'm talking about is things like, and I'd be like, well, what things are you talking about? Well, I'm talking about things like, I don't want to change the way I dress. I don't want to change the way I express myself. I don't want to, or within reason, that kind of stuff. And be like, oh, okay. So you're really talking about specific, whereas for him, I think he might be interpreting it differently. So it's important when you are in a discussion like this to try to give some examples, because talking abstractly runs the risk of completely misunderstanding each other. And And along those lines, that's why I often give examples when I'm lecturing to my students, and also when I'm talking to my clients, and when I'm also talking in these reaction videos. You'll see me give a lot of examples, because we can talk abstractly all day long and never understand even what we mean ourselves. It's one of the ways you can avoid having to say anything at all, is to just stay in the abstract realm, because anything that, any criticism of what you say, you'd be like, well, that's not what I meant, because you didn't really say anything. Until you make it concrete, often you're really not saying anything at all. So it's just a general thing that I recommend that people do.
Yo tengo mucho respeto.
No tengo problema. Tú puedes tener amigos.
Yo puedo tener amigos. No necesito permiso. Yo soy un adulto, una mujer, no soy una niña.
Tú lo tienes en primer lugar a tus amigos.
Right, so they're completely missing each other. What he's saying is that, do I matter? I don't feel like I matter to you. What she is saying is, you can't dictate who I'm friends with. Both of those are compatible. But because no one's there to help them, they're misunderstanding each other and running away with it in their minds.
Ese va a ser el problema.
Forget it. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done.
Y tú quieres.
And this is universal. I've done it in my life. Everyone around me has done it. All my clients do it. When we misunderstand, it's so much about misunderstanding. If you're ever pissed off and hurt and bothered and annoyed and resentful of your partner, in all likelihood, it has to do with misunderstanding. There might be things that are actually happening, but the base, the foundation of it all is misunderstanding and misinterpreting and miscommunicating. Because a lot of times the communicator doesn't even know what they're trying to communicate. So it's not even necessarily like they meant to say this, but they accidentally indicated something else. It's most people don't have the self-awareness to even know what they're feeling in the moment. So that's another part of the misunderstanding. People misunderstand themselves and thus indicate in a confusing way, in an obscure way, and then it gets misinterpreted. So I can't remember when I figured this out, but it was a long time ago. It helps me when I'm helping clients over the years to develop certain tenets of psychology and human relations. And this was one of them, which was that people, when they have these kinds of disagreements and these kinds of troubles, it's not because there's a fundamental because the conclusion each person will come to is they're a problem. There's something wrong with them. They're inconsiderate, unempathetic, uncaring, a jerk face, a con artist, whatever. But often what is the case, if not 99.9% of the time, you're interpreting their behavior in that way, and it's logical. It makes sense that you would do that. But because you are interpreting it in a certain way, and because they are not communicating effectively, and because the other person doesn't even understand themselves, you are concluding something that makes sense based on an obscure situation that a lot of interpretations can be made. And if we can actually help the two of you not only understand yourself, but then also communicate it, then you'll be able to see through all this stuff, and you'll see that actually deep down the other person is not a monster. The other person is a loving human being, and there's a lot of ability. And when you can see that and you can build that, and the trust and the love and the security and the stability and the strength of a relationship that happens when I have this visualization of like the two of them where you see their body language, right? And that's on the surface of my metaphor. And then underneath, for both of them, you have pain and anxiety, and this child inside of each of them that is having all these reactions, but they're hiding it. They might not even know it is there, or they want to deny it or something. And if those two components could talk, all of this would go away. But it's this, IFS talks about the protector and this sort of thing. And if we can get to the real Yohan and Danielle, and those two components could actually trust each other enough to expose that and to communicate that, then all the problems go away. They do. They really do. And when I discovered this in my own life, it completely revolutionized the way I approached my marriage and my relationships, everything, my work relationships, how I see myself, everything is revolutionized by this idea. I didn't invent it. I have a particular version of it that I communicate, but emotionally focused therapy, attachment theory, Bowlby, Ainsworth, these individuals talk about it a lot before I did, researched it a lot before I did. There's also a lot of Fonagy and object relations and humanistic folks, Carl Rogers, a lot of people before me talked about this sort of thing. Donald Fairbairn, Winnicott, Kohut, anyway, I stand on the shoulders of giants, so I didn't invent it. So and that's even more disheartening, because a lot of these ideas have been around for at least 70, 80 years, and it still isn't really infused in our society. And that's depressing. But there's hope, right? If we can actually, so, what I always am hoping for is that this would literally be a class we would take in school for our entire school life in public school. We would start with a first grade version of this, age appropriate, right? And by the time you are in the 12th grade, then you have some pretty advanced understanding of how this, imagine how the world would be different. Not only relationships like this, but politics and the political divide and nations to nations and corporations and work relations, like everything would change for the better, in my opinion. And okay, we lose a little bit of emphasis on some other school subject. Okay, I think it's a fair trade. But that would just never happen. I know some schools and teachers are introducing these topics, but they're often now I will also say that a lot of parents and a lot of kids are I would say it's anecdotally way more emotionally aware and differentiated and advanced than we were when we were kids. So maybe it will happen in the future. And also there are pockets of things, there was that kid, Asian American kid, I think, who was being filmed. The kid didn't know that they were being filmed, and the kid was like talking, I think maybe like 2 years old, 3 years old, saying, "Mom, I understand your feelings," and just really advanced. A lot of people said it to me, and it was like, you're just like, whoa, this kid has this way beyond a lot of adults and their understanding of emotions and how to communicate it. So there are pockets, yeah. So I guess I do have some hope. Hey, deserving listeners, today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes in life, we are faced with tough choices, and the path forward isn't always clear. And some of you might even be facing a tough choice right now. Well, for me, I like to fully explore all the options. That usually helps me to feel more confident moving forward. And sometimes it really helps to talk with someone and get their perspective and maybe their wisdom. And of course, therapy can help with this. I never planned on specializing in this area when I started out as a therapist, but over time, a lot of clients have come to me when they are facing tough choices that they're having a hard time figuring out what to do. Well, one option worth exploring is BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's worth giving a try. It's entirely online, it's designed to be convenient and suited to your schedule, and also you can switch therapists at any time at no additional charge. So, let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
Tus amigos, tú quieres seguir con tus amigos, tú puedes seguir con tus amigos.
I'm not doing this anymore. I'm done. Enough.
You're crazy.
Enough.
Yeah. I was wondering if they'd be able to pull out of the nosedive even during this conversation, but clearly not. So, yeah, I think we saw the degradation of their love for each other. And once that's gone, what's the point? Why try? You don't even want to try. Even sometimes couples would come to me 5 years after this point and ask me to fix their marriage. I mean, not explicitly, but that's the hope. And I always operate from the beginning of the first session assuming otherwise, assuming that there is hope and some connection, some potential. But usually pretty quickly I start to detect, maybe not in the first session, but eventually I start to detect like, oh, I think one or both might be done. And then I have a whole assessment procedure that I do. Because if I just ask like, are you done? You know, some people say no, even though they really are. So I have to kind of massage a little bit. But when I discover that, then it's a whole other conversation, right? Because if you're done, then there's not any motivation to make it undone, right? You're done, and you don't want it to be otherwise, but you're going through the motions as if you do want it to change. And so it would, behoove them to understand the scenario so that they don't waste their time and waste my time, frankly, because it can be very frustrating to work with clients that say they want to change, but they do not want to actually change. So now there's a careful distinction there, because a lot of therapists will jump to the conclusion of just like, they don't want to change, I reject them, when there is a kernel of motivation there. So I'm not saying that. So it's a careful balance. Anyway, point is that for them, they have. So the point is that when you've lost that love, when it's been snuffed out, the flame has been snuffed out, it's really hard to rekindle that, because the resentment is there, hatred can be there. So I've been seeing that. I think first it was him, and then he did all the things to her, and then I think now she's on board with that.
Leave me alone. Just leave me
Escúchame,
alone.
estamos hablando.
You don't shut up. You don't shut up. You've literally been talking for 10 minutes. I'm not even listening to you. I'm done. When I said I'm done, I meant I'm done.
So that's evidence that this is edited. Obviously, we know that, but sometimes I hear indications of, oh, we missed a whole section. Who knows, it was 10 minutes, but I do suspect that he was saying a lot of things to maybe convince her to not give up or maybe he's even just trying to drive the nail into the coffin more and just saying like, look, you have to be submissive. That's the only way this is going to work. And he knows it's not going to work. But the way it's edited, it looks like he barely talked and she's saying, shut up.
Done meaning finished. Termina. Done. No más. ¿Qué tú no entiendes? I don't want to hear it anymore. I don't care. Call a priest, call your mother, call your grandpa. I don't care. I don't want to hear it anymore. I'm done.
En serio.
So this is what we call stonewalling, right? And on the internet, I think people equate stonewalling with abuse or something. I saw that when we were watching The Ultimatum. It can be, but we've all stonewalled people. It happens all the time. You might even stonewall, like you're at a store and you and the cashier have a bit of a disagreement and you stonewall them. You just sort of shut down and be like, I'm not going to try anymore. Obviously, there are more concerning versions, like in a relationship. So it's what people do when they have a lot of distress and or, and they're panicking, and their only way to get out of it is to stonewall and to walk away or to shut the conversation down. So essentially, the definition of stonewalling is, in a relationship, you're trying to work something out. You're trying to come to an agreement. You're trying to solve a problem. And one person just says, I'm not participating in this conversation anymore. They might kind of participate by saying, because she's still technically participating in the conversation. She's saying words, but she is no longer interested in trying to work it out. Now, there are instances where stonewalling might be healthy. If someone is badgering you or you're running in circles or something, sometimes stonewalling can, or at least it's a lesser of two evils, because it's just like, well, I can continue to have this conversation, but it's pointless, so I'm just going to stonewall. And a distinction needs to be made between stonewalling and, in a healthy way, taking a break from relationship. They can look very similar, and sometimes it's both, but because you can end a conversation because you know that it's not going to help to continue, or at least pause the conversation. And it can be interpreted as stonewalling, but it might not necessarily be. The difference is that for someone that is not stonewalling, they want to return to the conversation when one or both people have de-escalated in terms of their distress. So that's different. Stonewallers are just like, I'm done and I don't want to return to this. This is over. And again, a lot of times it's not some sort of Machiavellian thing where the person's like, ha ha ha, I'm going to shut this conversation. They're literally panicking and they have no other way. They might seem very calm and walking away, but on the inside they are completely freaking out. That's usually the case, and they measured that in the lab in Gottman and researchers. And it brings to another thing that whenever Gottman is mentioned, people will send me clips and they'll be like, "Oh, someone mentioned Gottman," and I'm just like, so apparently I talk about Gottman a lot. Anyway, the research that John Gottman and colleagues did over decades is so important to my work. It doesn't. It's not the primary basis of how I see couples and how I work with people, but to have the data there, the longitudinal data, the lab data, where they literally would create these fake homes and have couples come in and hang out and live in these homes, and they would film them and they would code their behaviors, and then they would longitudinally monitor these couples for years afterwards and see which ones were happy and which ones weren't, which ones divorced, which ones didn't in the future. And then they gathered all this data. That's how we know things, is when you observe and you actually have empirical data to go off of. And this sort of research isn't usually funded. So, it's very important to me. That's why I talk about it. Plus, he's from my alma mater at University of Washington, which is another probably bingo thing, every time he mentions his alma mater. Anyway, so what I was saying was that they measured in the lab, they could tell that, so they watched the stonewalling happen, whether physically or just verbally, and they looked at the biological markers of distress, and they found that the people who were stonewalling had a lot of distress anyway, even though they didn't indicate or even know it themselves. So she is shutting the conversation down, and it's possible that it is healthy to do so. It's also possible that she's just she's not respecting him, and she's like, "You're not being submissive to me, and I don't like your attitude, so we're done." Okay, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.